Okay, let's get into this national championship game. So it'll be the first time in 9 years that we do not have a representative from the SEC in the national championship game. And it just so happens that this 14 playoff, this version of this playoff is going to be bookended. The first one, Big Ten Pac 12. The last one, Big Ten Pac 12. And you can make an argument it's basically kind of an all Big Ten national championship game with Washington's move into the Big Ten for next year. These two teams, by the way, will play next year in the regular season in a rematch of the national championship game in October. Let me get into this ball game. Washington and Michigan are both elite football teams, and they execute their version, their blueprint, their mentality as well as anybody, and that's why they're in this spot. They're undefeated for a reason. Even though a lot of people have been doubting Washington specifically, this team continues to win one-possession games. They are elite where they want to be elite, both of these teams. And you've heard me say on this show a lot, actually, and I believe in this wholeheartedly. Great football teams are not great because they have no weaknesses. Great football teams are great because they identify their strengths and then they build habits, they build blueprints, they build game plans around those strengths. And that's exactly what these two teams do to a great degree. They're great coaching staffs on both of these teams. Kalen DeBoer has been excellent everywhere he's been. He is now, I think, 104-11 as a head coach, which is a ridiculously good record. I mean, obviously, Harbaugh has won everywhere he's been, whether it's San Diego or Stanford or San Francisco, and now Michigan. The guy is an elite football coach, period. I don't care what you think about him personally. Jim Harbaugh is an elite football coach, and he has now brought Michigan back to the place where they dreamed of being ever since 1997, which is in the preeminent game in college football, the national championship game. So great matchup from a coaching perspective, these elite guys. We've got talent all over the field, a lot of guys that you're going to see on Sunday. Probably the premium talent on the field is going to be Michael Penix, the quarterback of Washington, who has played at such an elite level, not just this year, but really over the last 2 years, that he's been the leading passer in the sport back-to-back seasons. And that is really where this game is going to, I think, center for a lot of people. The conversation and the focus of this game is going to center around Michael Penix and that Washington passing attack. Because as we know, it's as good as any in the country. And I do want to sit with Washington for just a moment, because if you're asking yourself, or if you're just talking and you come across like, do these teams resemble national champions? You know, in some ways, you got to be built similarly to the way other teams have been built to win this game. And, you know, for the most part, you would say, yes, these two teams are built to win the national championship. But in Washington's case, is actually a little bit different. They're trying to make up for what is not a national championship caliber defense with an elite passing game and offense. And the statistics bear that out. I'm not trying to knock them. I'm just giving you, from a historical reference point, what it would mean if Washington were to win the game next Monday, in particular as it relates to their defense. Okay. Washington's defense is currently 54th in the country in scoring defense and 97th in the country in total defense. So they're better at keeping points off the board than they are in terms of total defense, which is where you would want to be better, by the way, because that's the main point. And to give you some context about those numbers, 54th in scoring, 97th in total defense, it would be the worst statistical defense to win a national title since the start of the BCS. So that's going back to 1998. In 2010, Auburn, with an elite quarterback and a great offense, won the national championship with a defense that was 53rd in scoring and 60th in total defense. So at least statistically speaking, a better defense than what this Washington defense is. In 2019, that LSU team led by Joe Burrow, which a lot of people are comparing this Washington team to, which I love it. I love those comparisons because of the elite nature of the quarterback, the elite nature of the wide receivers. I think that the comparison fits. However, that LSU was the worst defense to win in the CFP era, a national championship. They won with the 32nd ranked scoring defense and the 31st ranked total defense. But folks, that's way better than Washington's defense. Again, 54th in scoring, 97th in total defense. Here's to give you some reference point of what that would mean. Here are statistically some of the worst total defenses to win the national championship. You'll see Auburn in 2010 with the 60th ranked total defense. And yet, outside of that, since the start of the BCS, you do not see a team past 32nd in the country that has won a national championship. All right. So that's a telling stat. It's there for a reason. It's really difficult to be that good throwing the football and win the whole thing. As far as a scoring defense goes, the worst scoring defense was that Auburn team. They were 53rd. And again, Washington just outside of that at 54th. And if you look a little deeper into the numbers, you'll see that outside of that Auburn team, the worst scoring defense was actually LSU at 32 in the country. So a lot of numbers to tell you that this is an outlier. All right. And it's not a knock. It's just the truth. Washington's defense is made up for by the fact that their offense, their quarterback, and their wide receivers are as good as you'll find out there. That passing game is exquisite. It's beautiful in a lot of regards. Watching them go to work against Texas was a thing of beauty on Monday night. And in a lot of respects, their matchup was very favorable against Texas because Texas doesn't defend the pass very well. So it was strength for Washington against a weakness for Texas. Now, that turned out to be somewhat of a close game. But if you're going to look at this game, past that defensive perspective for Washington, I think that you've got to then start to look at whose terms is the game going to be played on, because these two teams are so different. And I know that that's obvious, but they are so different. And the style of game that they want to play is so different. So I want to talk about what is Washington's path. Okay. What are their terms? And maybe these are obvious, but with a defense ranked with where they're ranked, they have to play on their terms. See, I don't believe that Washington can win a game that is played on Michigan's terms. Okay, so they have to play their style of game in order to win on Monday night. And they've been able to do that. They've been able to do that against everybody. Now, the only game that really wasn't played on their terms, you could make an argument, was Washington State, maybe Arizona State, and they were still able to get W's. But those two teams, not nearly the caliber of what they're going to see on Monday against Michigan. So what is the path? What are the terms for Washington? Well, more possessions. Okay, I want more margin for error on my offense. I want more margin for error with my defense than less. And so I want to see Michael Penix on the field. And it's not just about the time of possession, and more on that later. It's actually the number of possessions. Okay, and I'll get into this when I talk about Michigan's defense, but if Michigan is just forcing Washington to snap the ball a lot, that does not favor Washington. They need more possessions. And the reason is that they need a wider margin for error. Okay, so when they have more possessions, it negates the impact of a potential defensive play or a third down sack or a turnover. And so what it does is it puts the odds more in your favor. If you're going to throw the football quite a bit and you're going to have talented guys on the outside, you want to do that more than the opposition wants you on the field. And so the number of possessions, I think, is critical. In college football this year, on average, there were 12 offensive drives per game. Now, in Michigan games, it's lower than that. Michigan games, they average about 11 per game. That's the 10th fewest in the country, round numbers. So Michigan's looking for limited possessions. Washington's looking for increased possessions. I would go fast if I was Washington. I would try to get that defense tired, namely the pass rush. And what that does is it's going to put an immense amount of stress on Michigan's team, not just because of the playing pace, but also the urgency that Michigan's offense will have to operate under in order to keep up. Okay, because if you increase the possessions, you increase the total amount of points, you increase the possible amount of points. And now you're going to force J.J. McCarthy, the run game, Sharon Moore, the offensive coordinator, to go out there and maybe play an uncomfortable style of football. Now, could Michigan still win that style of game? Yeah, they might be able to still win that style of game, but it certainly fits Washington. And I don't think Washington can go the other direction and win a limited possession game. Okay, so that's number one, increase the number of possessions. If I'm Washington, my passing attack is going to have to be elite. And it has been, and it was against Texas. There's no doubt. This is the number one passing attack in college football. They're averaging 350 yards per game. But now they're going to go up against a very different animal than they did in their semifinal matchup against Texas. Texas is, well, I mean, to put it bluntly, not even close to the same pass defense as what Michigan's was. I think, don't quote me on this, I think Texas was 94th in the country. That number stands out, but I know that they were worse than 90th in the country stopping the pass. And that played out. I mean, Penix threw the ball with ease. Now, did it look beautiful? Yes. At times, did it look like he was having to avoid the rush and manipulate the pocket and do some special things? Yeah. Yeah, it did. And that defensive line for Texas was going to be a problem. And they did provide some pressure, but Penix was so good manipulating the pocket and moving around that they were able to really hurt that Texas defense, who was, I think, overmatched in the secondary. Now, is that going to be the case for Michigan? I'm not sure. Michigan's defense is the number 2 ranked pass defense in college football. By the way, behind only Ohio State, which is interesting, but they're only allowing 150 yards per game. And so now you look at the matchups, and the matchups I think are really intriguing. I actually love these matchups. Will Johnson is an excellent corner. He's not draft eligible, but when he is draft eligible, I do believe that Will Johnson's going to be a first-round talent. And this is a kid that's a true sophomore that's going to get the job of having to go up against Rome Odunze at times. He got the job of going up against Marvin Harrison Jr. And by the way, that was a week in which Will was a little banged up and had a lower body injury. And he still got the assignment of going and roaming and being latched on Marvin Harrison Jr. Won't surprise me at all if Will moves around and attaches to Rome Odunze, who is outstanding. Michigan also has Mikey Sainristil still. Josh Wallace, the corner on the other side. And now they're going to have to defend Odunze, Polk, and McMillan. McMillan and Polk, they both line up in the slot at times during games. McMillan is primarily out of the slot, so that McMillan-Sainristil matchup, I think, is intriguing. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.